What's up guys? Now recently in the studio I've been doing a bit of a clean out because I've got so many systems that I've built over the last few months that they've started to pile up. Now as part of that cleanup I've actually torn a bunch of them down, but I've also started to merge them as well. This little system here was the fastest HP 285 G3 in the world, but it's had a bit of a change. It's actually had a bit of a downgrade because what we've installed into this system is the contents of our 2024 modern potato gaming PC. Luckily the system was actually quite compatible and I thought it actually shrunk things down as well as not having so many systems about. So this is now our potato PC going forward. It does handle the temperatures much better, and of course when we actually tested the original potato PC we showed you that it could still actually play a lot of games, but how far can we push it? Well, today we're gonna find out. So for those of you that didn't watch the previous videos, you won't remember this machine, and for those of you that did, we'll give you a bit of a recap over. Originally, we upgraded this system to be the world's fastest HP 285 G3 in the world. It is a Ryzen based platform, and we upgraded the CPU, the power supply, the RAM. We pretty much maxed the complete platform out, or as far as HP would actually let us go, and it performed exceptionally well. But now it's had a bit of a downgrade, and we've got the parts from our original potato PC. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see much because we have actually kept it as authentic as possible. We've still got the side tray in here which has got the DVD drive in there, but when we actually look at the parts inside, we do now have the AMD Ryzen 3 1200, probably AMD's weakest Ryzen processor ever made. It is a 4-core 4-thread processor, and to be honest it can pretty much get beaten by a 4th generation Intel processor, but it is a modern-ish platform, so it kind of works for a modern potato. For RAM we've got 8 GB of DDR4. It is only 266 megahertz, and it is running in dual channel because we've got 2 sticks of 4 GB, so at least we've got that going for it, but it is very low in terms of RAM. We actually decided to go with that originally because a lot of games still had it as their minimum requirement, and that kind of really filled out the potato look and feel. For the graphics card we have the Nvidia Geforce GTX 1650. That is a 4 GB card which requires a 6-pin PCIe connection, so it's not the worst card out there, but it's also not the best. They're quite slow nowadays, and again, just like the RAM itself, we kind of found it on a lot of the minimum requirements for modern games, so it kind of suited that build quite fine. The only one thing that we did change on this system compared to the original potato PC is we're not using a SATA SSD this time. This motherboard gives us access to an M.2 drive, so we've taken advantage of that and we've dropped in a 500 GB very basic standard generation 3 crucial drive. That shouldn't actually change the performance of the system that much at all, but we may actually get slightly faster speeds in loading times and stuff, but we're not measuring the speeds of loading and things like that. We're actually just measuring the game performance, so it should be completely fine. We've also kept in this system the 400 watt power supply that we upgraded before, just to make sure that the graphics card's got enough juice to perform to its maximum potential. So all in all, it is pretty much a decent system, although it is a bit of a potato, and we're going to see how far we can push it when it comes to games. Now, there is one game out there at the moment that will really push and test systems, and that game is, of course, Alan Wake 2. Can this system actually play Alan Wake 2? Will it even start the game? I'm not quite sure. I've not actually tried it, so what we need to do is get it onto the bench, install that game, and see what kind of performance we get. Now, like I said before, we've kept this system as authentic as possible, and it is basically a HP 285 G3. We've not modified anything, we've not changed anything apart from upgrading parts in it, or at least downgrading the CPU, because originally this had a 2200G in it. It now has the Ryzen 3 1200 in it, so it's a little bit slower, not that much to be honest. The 2200G was more like the 1200 but with an APU built into it anyway. One thing to note on this system though is that it is much better at handling its temperatures now. With this graphics card it doesn't get as hot at all, and it can just maintain those temps throughout even when gaming. We have tried some other games on it just to make sure that the potato-ness still remained, and it was clearly there. The last time we tested this system we tried a few games, things like Doom Eternal, which would actually work. It worked okay, but you couldn't really change the graphical settings that much. We tried games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and that worked perfectly fine, and then we actually put it against something like Cyberpunk 2077 where it struggled quite a bit. We had to do quite a bit of configuration to it inside the game settings just to get a reasonably smooth gameplay, and of course we had to really rely on things like FSR to even get it kind of playable. But can we actually do the same for Alan Wake 2? Well, I've installed the game. It is a much bigger game. It is much more demanding than anything else we've tested on this system, and I'm assuming we're probably going to run into a lot of problems. This system is probably going to require a lot of configuration to even get it running, but let's click start the game and see how well it does. Now, before we even get into any kind of loading screen, we've already got an error here, and this is that it's got not enough physical memory. That is actually system RAM. The actual message here is that the game requires at least 12 gigabytes of physical memory to run, and there is only 8 gigabytes available in the system, which we're fully aware of. So it would be interesting to see what would happen if we did upgrade the RAM in this. If you do have a system just like this at the moment that uses something like DDR4, upgrading the RAM is actually one of the cheapest things you can do, aside from upgrading to an SSD, but of course this one's got one. But RAM is actually going for super cheap prices now, particularly on the used market. If you do have a system like this and it's only got one stick of 8 gigabytes, as long as you can get a matching stick, you can just buy one. But for anybody out there that really just wants to buy or at least double up the RAM on this, we'd have to replace both sticks. You can get 16 gigabytes from eBay for around 20 to 25 pounds. It's a super cheap upgrade for a system like this, and it's probably definitely worth doing. But if I click OK, it's probably going to let us continue anyway. I suspect we're going to run into another issue. Here we go. There's the next error message here, and this one is actually on the GPU. It's saying that there are features missing, so your GPU does not support the recommended features. That will be things like shaders and all that kind of stuff. And it's also pulling up the fact that we've only got 4 gigabytes of VRAM when realistically the game requires 6. So already, before we even get into the game, we're getting issues here, but fortunately for us, it will let us continue again. We've seen this error before because we've tested this game with very similar graphics cards, probably not as powerful as this. So I'm hoping it will at least get into the game without crashing. I have tested this on a lot of the older Radeon cards, in particular things like the 480 and 580 4 gigabyte cards. You get the same errors here. We never got the memory issue because we actually run it with 32 gigabytes, but we got the same issue here where it talks about the graphics card, and then those ones would actually load the startup screen, but as soon as the game started, it would crash. Hopefully the system doesn't. Some people have told me that is because of the lack of VRAM, but we'll test that theory now and see if it's actually true. I think it was actually down to driver support more than anything, but let's click OK and see if we can get into the game. Now, while the game's loading, we can see in the corner that our actual graphs are going all over the place. We're currently running at around 92% on that CPU and 11% on the graphics card. That's because it's a loading screen. It's actually using the CPU, not the graphics card at this point. So I'm hoping that will switch the other way a little bit and put this graphics card under some pressure. It is starting to warm up now. I can hear the fans starting to kick up a little bit, but it's not too loud. It's actually a nice quiet system. I never got around to upgrading the cooling in this. I don't think we really need to with this kind of specification, although at some point I may just swap the fans out for Noctuas just to keep them a little bit cooler. Now the game is actually starting to play. It's a bit rough at the moment. We're getting 18 frames per second in this kind of cutscene thing, but it is in-game cutscene. It's not the greatest, but so far it hasn't crashed. The AMD cards of similar kind of specification would have crashed at this point and the game would have just locked up and you get a big error saying it's dead, you're not going to be able to do anything. But this one's actually gone in. We are being able to now move our character, but we're not having a great time. If we just turn the mouse very quickly, there's probably motion blur on this one because it's very blurry, but it doesn't help with that very low performance in the corner. We'll just reset some stats there and we'll see what our 1% lows are. The frame time graph is going all over the place. It's not a smooth gameplay experience. I don't think you can play it like this, but I don't actually know what we're configured to. So let's head over into the settings and see what we've actually got configured. It's really good that this game actually does start, but we'll go over to the graphics options now. We are currently running in 1080p native, so we've got no FSR at all. That's quite nice to know. We've got all of the effects on, so I'm presuming motion blur is the one that's causing us a bit of a motiony blurriness on the screen, which is not helped with the fact that we're only seeing 20 frames of it. Then we'll go down to the settings and everything at the moment is clicked to medium. So I think what we'll try first is we'll go to the FSR. We'll make sure that's enabled. We'll give it a balance setting. This is not going to be great without any kind of FSR. Don't even try to attempt to play this game without using FSR. It's good that they've included it. It's a shame they don't have FSR 3 on this game at the moment. There's just your only options is DLSS or FSR 2, and of course with the GTX 1650 you get no access to things like DLSS. Continuing down, we've got VSync enabled. We're going to disable that at the moment. I am going to put all the quality presets down to low. That's more kind of what you would expect for a system like this. And then we'll go back into the game and we'll see if that's made any difference at all. Now, our overall performance is increased by quite a bit. We're getting an average now of 44 frames per second with a 1% low of 26. If we can just get that 1% low to sit around 30, I think we'll be good to go, and we could actually declare this game as playable. There are lots of people that would play a game with 30 FPS, but we're still getting quite a bit of motion blur on the screen, and every time we turn quite quickly, the frame time's going all over the place, so it's not the best of experiences, although it is smoothing out quite a bit. So let's head back over to the settings, see what else we can change. Maybe we do need to just really ramp everything down now. I'm going to switch the render resolution down to performance mode. It is a very extremely demanding game, and for a system like this, we're asking way too much of it. We'll go down to some of the effects, and I'm going to turn these off, see if we can kind of clean up the picture a little bit, even though it takes the quality away. We've got global reflections here. We're going to turn that off. We've got screen space reflections. We're going to turn that off. Let's see if we can just at least give this little system the best chance. Scattered object density is on high, which is all the little bits on the floor that you can see. So of course the GPU's got to work hard to be able to do that. So we're going to turn that on to low. This will affect our picture quality by quite a bit, I imagine. So hopefully it's not too much. Hopefully it is still playable, and at least the performance is playable too. But the only other thing that we could do in potential here is actually drop the resolution itself, go down to something like 720 and still apply FSR. But generally when you do that, the games look terrible. But anyway, let's head back into the game and see what we're getting. Average FPS now is actually increased by quite a bit. We're nearly getting a 60 FPS experience here. It's around 55 frames per second, 54. It drops a little bit on the continuous when we do turn the mouse, but it's not too bad. We're currently still getting an average of around 24 frames per second on our 1% low. That's still not great. It's not going to provide the smoothest of experience, particularly when there's a lot of things on the screen, but it's starting to become much more playable. I don't know if many of you out there could play this, but graphically it still looks fine. The game did, even in a low setting with the low resolution. Modern games still look great, particularly for those who have older systems like this. There is some sacrifice that you really need to make when you do this, and of course visual quality is usually the thing, but so far we're playing perfectly fine. If we just head back into the settings, we'll just go to graphics again. I'm just going to enable VSync, see what happens, and what we'll do is we'll turn that performance down to ultra performance. This is really going to affect the picture quality now, because we're basically rendering it in such a low resolution and then expecting FSR to upscale it in some kind of better way. But yes, so clearly we can see there is a bit of a difference in terms of quality here. It looks like an older game, but we are getting some pretty decent stats now. We're getting an average of 55 frames per second still. Probably actually it's very similar to just running in a performance mode. So if you are going to be playing this game on a system like this and you do need to turn everything down like that, ultra performance or performance seems to provide pretty much the same experience. So let's head back into the options. We'll switch that back to performance just so the game looks a little bit better. VSync is still enabled. I'm going to leave that on. It is a shame that Nvidia just doesn't support DLSS on older cards like this. I'm assuming they just don't have the hardware to be able to do it, because of course we would have access to frame generation here. The people that develop this need to kind of pick the game up a little bit and get some FSR 3 in there, because that would really help people out with older systems like this. Let's switch it back to performance. I don't think there's anything else we can really turn off. Maybe because our performance is not really changing that much, we can probably, let's boost our texture resolution up a little bit, and we'll see if that helps with the quality of the picture. Back in the game now, reset some of our stats. We're getting an average of 57 frames per second with a 1% low of 22. It doesn't seem to matter what we do here. The graphics card just isn't powerful enough, or maybe the CPU, because in actual fact at the top here, the CPU when walking is the thing that's kind of throttling here. It's getting to about 99%. Maybe the Ryzen 1200 just isn't enough for the GTX 1650 in this game. That would be the suggestion here, because we're seeing it very similar now. CPU is about 100%, graphics card's running at about 80%. So maybe this graphics card does have a little bit more power in it, but we just can't utilize it because of that CPU. But anyway, if you are somebody with a system like this, you're going to get an average of around 55 frames per second in the current configuration, and we've nearly got 30 FPS. We're very close to 30 FPS on that 1% low. Frame time graph is up and down, particularly when moving the mouse. If we look around and get into more detailed areas, we'll do some running because that usually makes things go a bit crazy. It's not the smoothest experiences, but like I say before, if you are a gamer that has a system of this kind of level, you're going to have to either upgrade or sacrifice, and some of that is an experience here, and a lot of it is in the quality of the game. But there we go. For anybody out there that was wondering, can you play Alan Wake 2 on a potato PC or a modern version of a potato PC? Well, you can. The game will actually start if you've got an Nvidia graphics card like this. If you have one with an AMD version of anything around the 400 or 500 series, it just crashes when you start the game. We just couldn't get into it. But for anybody out there with an Nvidia 10 series or 16 series card in a bit of a potato format, you'll be glad to know that you can actually start the game and you can get it reasonably playable. Most people wouldn't want to actually play the game like this. They'll probably want to upgrade, and maybe we will do that in future on this system, just to see what would it actually take. Would upgrading the memory in this allow us to boost some of the performance? Or what about the CPU? We've got a few CPUs that this system could take. I'm not going to modify the system in today's video. We're just proving whether you can actually play it on a potato. You can. It's not great. Maybe in a future video we will do a bit of an upgrade, see what the minimum we can do. If you want me to do that, let me know in the comments below. But apart from that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.